We will be starting our self-care Saturday workshop today with Shara Nieto. Shara is a Chicana of Yucatec Maya heritage who was born and raised in LA. She has served youth and families through her work at Boys and Girls Club, the Native American Health Center, and has taught in classrooms and museums. In her personal life, she is an Aztec dancer who keeps her family grounded through traditional practices. Just to inform you, this workshop will be live streamed to Facebook and on YouTube. And if you have any questions, please utilize the chat and we will go ahead and try to answer them accordingly as possible. If there are too many questions, we'll try to move them towards the end. Thank you so much.
Bishaven Inkabae Shara Nieto. Hi, everybody. My name is Shara Nieto. Coming to you live from Oakland, land of the Ohlone people. And it's a pleasure to be here today to share a little bit about what I know with everybody on the virtual realm that we have here. If for whatever reason you can't hear me, please put it in the chat, let me know, or if there's too much background noise, let me know as well, because the gardener is here. Not the best day, but hey, people gotta work, right? So first off, I just would like to say thank you to Tia Chuchas and the team for inviting me out to come to this workshop, and for everybody who has put in effort to being able to host this for all of us today. So this is going to be a two-part demonstration that I'm going to share with you today on salve making and pomada making. And the first part is going to be showing you how to do the oil infusion. So this is a nice example of what that oil infusion will look like. This is a sweetgrass braid in grapeseed oil with a little bit of vitamin E that I made a few weeks ago. And then what we'll do is turn that oil infusion into a nice salve. So I think, you know, all of us have been washing our hands a lot, I hope, and these salves come in really handy, especially with all of that dryness that can come with, you know, washing your hands all the time and using all that sanitizer. So that's kind of what I've been using it for most recently. But really, it's about, for me personally, about self-care, right? During the pandemic, I was furloughed, and that was kind of a shock to me, as to many other people who probably experienced the same thing. And, you know, it was kind of a double-edged sword. I had an opportunity to like rest and relax and take care of myself and my family, and also do things that I never had an opportunity to do. And this was one of those things that I had been thinking about and I had wanted to do for a long time, but I didn't really have time for it in my life. So what turned out to be just, you know, salve for myself ended up becoming salves for all of my friends and family. And I ended up sending a whole bunch of these packages all throughout the Southwest to just, you know, send love to folks. How's that background noise? Are we okay, Alma?
We're good.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure because it's getting closer. So as Alma mentioned, I'm an Aztec dancer, I'm an educator, I'm an artist. Recently, I worked for the Heard Museum as director of education there, where I learned a lot about contemporary American Indian art, culture, and heritage. And then most recently, I got hired at the Desert Botanical Garden as their children and family education manager. So that space has been really inspiring for me to learn more about the plants that I now am surrounded with. I live in Phoenix, land of the O'odham, Peepash, and Maricopa. And it's the desert, right? And the desert has a lot of medicine around it. I was born and raised in LA, so what I was used to working with was California sage. So the recipe I'm going to share with you guys today has a little bit of, you know, that California side and also that Arizona side, and those medicines that have been most accessible to me and that I have really developed a relationship with over the years. So I also used salves postpartum. One of our friends had given us this really beautiful peyote salve, and after I had my baby, it was a really hard sort of delivery process. And a friend came over and gave me a massage with that salve, and it was the most amazing thing ever. Massage as it is amazing, but paired with the salve, it was even more incredible. So I think, there's been these moments in my life where self care has been really, really necessary. Postpartum is one. You got to take care of yourself after postpartum. And, obviously the pandemic has been really hard for many of us and our families and communities. So this is another nice way you can take care of yourself. And then usually what I'm going to teach you today is you'll have a lot more than you can actually use. So hopefully you're able to share some of these salves with friends and family. You're welcome to follow along with me, or you could just listen and watch. This will be recorded so you can watch it over and over again as many times as you'd like. Or you can also turn on your camera so that I can see what you're doing and you can ask questions live and we can troubleshoot things that you may come across that you might have questions about. So this recipe, I learned it from the Chia Cafe Collective. If any of you are familiar with them, they're a group of indigenous chefs and people in California that came together and created this really beautiful cookbook. And inside the cookbook, one of the recipes that was shared was from Craig Torres. So if you're interested in his recipe, it differs a little bit from mine, because what you'll find is that as you do this, you'll start to kind of tweak it for yourself and what works for you. But the gist and the general idea is there as well. Craig Torres is Tongva and Gabrieleño, and he does a lot of work throughout Southern California with many indigenous tribes. So just want to acknowledge him for being generous and sharing this recipe with all of us, that then I get to share it with all of you. So hopefully this little sharing continues to go, and next time you guys are doing the workshop, either at Tia Chucha's or somewhere else. So let's go ahead and get started. So you want some dry herb, right? Here's an example of what I'm going to be working with today. This is creosote from Arizona that I harvested in the spring. And unfortunately, we didn't have our monsoon that we normally have every summer. So the creosote was not as abundant as it usually is. So I didn't harvest very much of it. And then I also have some California sage right here that I'm going to be using. Now, California sage, I'm guessing most of you are coming in from California, has been really over harvested. So I just wanted to say that if you are going to use California sage, just to be very mindful of where you are sourcing your sage from, and to try to develop a relationship with that sage and see if you can even grow it yourself. California is amazing in that it has such fertile land. And for me personally, anytime I threw a seed on the ground, haphazardly even, things continue to pop up. So if you can get your hands on some seeds, I would really recommend trying to grow the sage, or trying to find somebody that might be growing it that you can maybe barter with or buy it from them. This particular sage that I'm using today is from a friend out here in San Francisco, who grows it herself. And I'm lucky that I have a few friends that grow sage and work in farms. So we often trade. I traded salves for this sage. And then the next time I need sage, I'm probably going to trade some creosote with her, because she wants creosote, doesn't have access to it. And I want sage and I don't have access to it. So I'm saying this so that if you have networks of people that you can barter and trade with, I think that, our people have been doing this for thousands of years, and we can continue to develop and build those relationships if we don't already have that in our lives. So a lot of times people who are in the Aztec dance world will also be able to help you get access to some of this stuff. I might see that we have some questions that have popped up. Do you want to share those with me, or should I?
Yes, Shara. Just really quickly, somebody asked, does the sage have to be dry or fresh?
Yes. So what you want to do is, with whatever herb you're working with, you want your herb to dry out. You want that herb to dry out, because then you're going to put it into your oil, and you don't want any of that moisture in your oil, because as you know, water and oil just doesn't mix, right? And you don't want to like spoil your batch. So you want to make sure it's really, really dry. This sage has been drying for some time now, at least a few months. And this creosote, because it's smaller, it tends to dry out a little bit faster. And I didn't bundle it like I bundled the sage. I live in Phoenix, so it's very dry out there and things dry really fast. Depending on where you live, you have to gauge that really well. In the Bay Area, for instance, it's really moist and wet if you're like in San Francisco and Oakland. And so it's going to take a little bit longer to dry that stuff out, right? Was there another question?
Yes. Can you provide the name of the collective and book?
Yes, hold on. So let me show you this. Chia Cafe Collective, Cooking the Native Way. So super dope book. If you don't already have this, I highly recommend it. It has really wonderful recipes in it. There's one that is my particular favorite, which is a pickled yucca flowers. So delicious. I hope we'll get a workshop on that next time.
Last question. What is the name of the herb? Can you spell it out?
Creosote or the sage, California sage?
Creosote.
Creosote is Creoste, I believe. And in the Ottoms in Arizona call it shugi or shugoi, right? And it has a lot of really beautiful antimicrobial and bacterial properties, as does sage, right? So I encourage you guys to do your research and be able to find those herbs that work best for you. And that's so exciting. The book is at Via Chuchas. Yes. You guys have a great collection. Any others?
That's it so far.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So my trusty little molcajete, if you have a bigger one, that might be better because you're able to process a lot more at one time. But if you don't have a molcajete, you can also just do a rough chop of these herbs. And so for me, I'm going to do half creosote and half California sage. And sometimes I don't have creosote, so I just do sage. And sometimes I don't have California sage, and I'll just do creosote. And as you saw with the earlier infusion that I showed you, I did one with sweetgrass. So I started kind of experimenting with the different herbs that I had access to and started making different salves. Once you kind of make one batch, you'll probably do the same batch again to see if you can get that same consistency. And then you can start expanding from that as well, right? So when I work with the creosote, one of the things that I'm doing right now is I'm breaking off like the big branches and just getting the little leaves in here. And then when you get enough of them in your molcajete, then it's just about grinding them down to break up the fibers a little bit more and be able to utilize as much of this medicine as you can and get that into your salve that you're making. And you'll notice too that I keep saying medicine. I'm not saying medicine in like the traditional way, like, the prescription drugs. I'm using medicine thinking about like the plants, right, that have cured us and healed us for so many years. You can think of, the teas that your mom or your grandma would make for you when you weren't feeling well. I know that for me personally, my first experience with salves was probably vapor rub. Although I don't use it anymore, has petroleum and all kinds of stuff that's not very good for us. That was definitely my first experience, just getting like rubbed down as a kid whenever I got sick. You guys probably have a very similar experience too with vapor rub, but this is the alternative to vapor rub. Any questions so far?
We have a question in the chat. What are the properties of sage and creosote that you are using to make the salve?
So as I mentioned, creosote has antimicrobial and bacterial properties, and you really want to do your own research with whatever plants you're working with, because certain plants, might not be good for this sort of thing. I'm using the plants that are near me, where I live or where I have lived, and those plants that I have a relationship with. So I think wherever you're calling in from, you'll be able to find what plants, call you and are best for you, right? I did, like I said, I started expanding on the other herbs that I had access to, like the sweetgrass, and that's just because I love the way sweetgrass smells, and I normally use it to like burn and like you would copal or sage. But a Navajo girl had made a sweetgrass, what was it, a soap, and I was like, that is a wonderful idea. Let me see if I can make a salve out of it. And so far so good, right? So yeah, do some research because they're all going to be a little bit different. Any other questions?
Yes, the second question is, do you know of any herbs that could support arthritis or swelling of tendons?
Yeah, so I'm not an herbalist. So no, my partner's a naturopath. He's on the call as well. He naturopaths and herbalists would be better at advising you about something like that. I know that like warming things are really good for that sort of stuff. So another workshop I had taken with a friend of ours, he said to like I think we put paprika or cinnamon or something like that, but I made mine too hot. So you can go the complete opposite direction of like, no, that's not what I wanted, or too intense, I guess. But yeah, do some research. Any other ones?
Not right now.
Okay. So what you want to do is you want to get about 2 cups of this. And as you can see, it takes some time to be able to process it. For me, it's also like a meditation. It's an opportunity, again, to build that relationship with the plants, right? As you're working with them, you're smelling their herbs. I wish you were here to be able to smell that. Oh my God, it's just like delicious. The smell of the creosote, it's like desert rain smell, If you've ever been out to Arizona, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then just the smell of the dried sage being broken up too, it just releases those aromas, which is really nice, right? Because that's what you want in your oil. So I think I have about a cup here now. And it's a pretty rough chop. You can smell that, and take a whiff and just imagine. I'm guessing most of you have some experience with California sage. All right, so that's about a cup. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour this cup into a jar, right? You can use like a mason jar. I like to recycle a lot of my jars, just like my grandma did, repurpose everything, right? As long as it's not something that's too pungent or fragrant that you've had in there, like kimchi. Probably wouldn't use that unless I really clean that out, maybe with some vinegar and some warm water or something. So this one is a mason jar that I happened to pick up. And you can see here, I prepared another cup prior to this. You can see here, I'm almost about an inch from the top, right? So I think that I might just put a little bit more in here. So whatever sort of jar you're using to fill your herbs and your oil with, you want to make sure that you leave an inch from the top of your jar. Everything needs to be covered, right? And you'll see more of what I mean here. So, Alma, where do you get your sage from? Do you have any good sources?
I can't say at the moment.
Yeah. So I love the San Francisco Herb Company. They sell in bulk. They don't sell sage necessarily, but you know, if you wanted to make a lavender oil, they have a really nice big bulk bag of lavender. And if you buy lavender, you want to make sure it's like from France because they have big giant lavender fields there, and it's probably not going to be as highly not processed, but so many chemicals as what we use here in the United States. So check that out. I have a lot of herb in there, creosote and the California sage. It smells so good. All right, so the next thing is to put the oil. So this is organic olive oil from Costco, pretty accessible. I like to try to use organic products as much as possible because it's going on my skin. It's going on my child's skin. And I just want to make sure that whatever my skin is absorbing is going to be good for me. So if you can, be mindful of that and buy that. It costs a few extra dollars, but I think it's a worthwhile investment. You can use other oils as well. Different oils have different properties, right? Avocado oil, you can use walnut oil. Don't use castor oil. That's the only oil you don't want to use. And you probably don't want to use like canola oil and that sort of stuff. So get yourself a really good quality oil, jojoba oil. That can be really expensive though, right? But you can experiment with different oils. A lot of people like grapeseed oil too because it's not as pungent as olive oil is. So like if you've ever cooked with olive oil and purchased olive oil, you'll notice it has like a really strong smell. It's good. I love it. I love to eat a lot of olive oil too and put in my salads and whatnot. But I just use whatever I have available to me. And usually I either have coconut oil, grapeseed oil, or olive oil. Today I'm going to use olive oil. And you'll see here, I'm just pouring the olive oil in. God, that looks so good. And then I'm going to make sure all of my herbs are covered. And then I'm going to leave an inch of space from the top of my jar. Okay. You can see all the air bubbles are kind of escaping. So next comes the fun part. See right now, if you smell it, I almost only smell the olive oil now. But in a week from now, I'll be able to smell the herbs. So you're going to cover this. And if you live in Southern California, it's pretty sunny most of the time. You could put this out in the sun for a week in a paper bag. And then after a week, your oil will be ready. Some people like to use the slow cooker. I haven't done that yet. And then other people like to do the slow sort of processing of the oil and put it like in your closet in a dark space for a month. And then what I would do is just kind of turn it, you know, every week or so and make sure all those air bubbles are out as well. So earlier you could see little bubbles kind of like working their way up to the top. So I would just leave this out for a week in a paper bag. That's my favorite way of doing it. I live in Phoenix, so it's really hot out there, and it just kind of like, I feel like even just the sun's rays and that energy gets into my salve as well. But I've also done it in my closet too when it's winter time and it's a little bit colder outside. So that's the first part of the process. It's making your oil infusion. A week later, voila, you have this beautiful oil done. As you can see, I made half a batch here. So depending on what you have available to you, you know, you can modify and adjust your recipe. I used 2 cups for this particular one, and I used 1 cup of herb for this one that you see right here. And the other thing I like to do is I like to date it and write down what I put in there because sometimes you forget. So you'd be surprised. You're like, I'm going to remember, I'm not going to forget. But then maybe you don't come back to it till a month from now and you're like, what herbs did I use? What oil did I use? Because people will ask you, right? Like, what's in this? Especially if you're giving it away as gifts. But this one has jojoba oil, olive oil, creosote, and sage. Again, it's just because of what I happen to have accessible to me. So, oh yeah, that smells really good. So, oh, I want you guys to smell it. Yeah. So this is ready. And this is what happens next. So what you're going to do is you want, for the next part, is you want yourself a funnel. You want a cheesecloth or some sort of preferably organic material that you can utilize. This one I happen to get at Sprouts, and it's for like your trail mix and whatnot. Or you can go to the dollar store and pick up some of this nice mesh sort of cheesecloth. I personally have done it with cheesecloth, but I feel like it gets too messy. So today I'm going to use this bag right here. So, and then you also want a container. I'm going to put mine in this little container today because I made just a small batch of it right here. So you want to make sure your container is dry because you don't want to mess up that oil, right? And if you want to preserve it a little bit longer, if you don't think you're going to get to it right away, you could put a few drops of vitamin E at the very end of this process, not right now. Any questions so far, Emma?
None yet. If
Okay.
anybody does have a question, put them in the chat and we'll try to address them.
Yes, please feel free to ask, and I'll try to answer whatever I can. So I am gonna put my herbs in here. I like this. I think it like contains it really well, and you know, you're able to just, I'm kind of a clean freak. Anybody who knows me will tell you. So I'm dumping my herbs into my bag, and then I'm going to let all that oil drip in. And this is nice too, because if your hands are already dry, they're not going to be by the end of this. So you can see here how it's already starting to drip into my jar. And then I'm going to squeeze the rest out as well. How many people on the call today have ever done this? Put something in the chat. Let us know if you've tried this before. How many of you are following along with us? I can't see you, so. So yeah, I'm just squeezing all of that out, trying to get as much of it as I can. This can get a little bit messy. And this is also nice too to do if you have kids in your family. I think it's important to involve them in the process and to teach them. They'll especially like the grinding of the herbs, right? I have all this oil in my hands, so now I'm gonna put it on my hands. Any questions so far? What comments did we get? Clove. Okay, good. People are sharing. Okay, so let's get to the rest of it. So once you have your oil, got a little too much oil here. Look at that. Once you have your oil, you're going to get to the next step. Oh, that smells really good. So what you're going to do next is you need a double broiler. So I never grew up with like an official double broiler. This was our double broiler. It was a pot and then another smaller pot that fit within that pot. So what I ended up doing is I happened to have this really cool measuring cup at home. And with this measuring cup, I just kind of only use it for salve making because I don't want it to have like cross-contamination with my food. And I don't want my food to start tasting like salves or my salves to start smelling like salsa or whatever I'm warming up in those things. So I kind of keep them separate. When I first started, I didn't do it that way. But as I started kind of making more of these salves, and I'm like, it kind of needs its own stuff, right? So I have my own sort of cutting board, my own molcajete for the salve making. I also make soaps and salt rubs, sugar scrubs, salt baths, bath sprays or body sprays, all that sort of stuff. I'll have another workshop at the end of the month with Tia Chuchas as well on the 28th for the Literacy Festival. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, feel free to join. And again, I think as my water boils, it's really important to, like, I think self-care a lot of times and this sort of like thing, we think about it as like being inaccessible or too expensive for us. And um what I'm sharing with you today, like there's an investment initially because you're buying like your olive oil and your beeswax, but it'll last a really, really long time and you'll get a lot out of it. So I'm warming up my water. And as I warm up my water, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put half a cup of this oil into my measuring cup that's also serving as where I will heat the oil. And once the oil starts to heat up a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some beeswax in it, and that's going to be my binder for this specific salve. So this particular beeswax I purchased online, and again, I try to buy organic so that it's really good for me. And you just need a little bit. You don't need very much at all. So you want 2 tablespoons of beeswax. I'm going to start with 1 first because I want that wax to melt entirely before I put the next tablespoon of beeswax. So this is what it looks like, right? So I'm going to put it in there and I'm going to wait for it to melt, but not overcook it either, because you don't want to cook out all of those great properties that are in your oil. So you got to watch this really carefully. And you want to make sure you don't burn your trenza. So maybe put that back. So initially, when you put your wax in there, let's see if you guys can see this. Oh, not yet without spilling it up. You'll see all of the little wax that's in there, and you want to make sure that it's translucent and that your water is hot, but once it starts boiling, you want to lower that water a little bit. I mean, not the water, the flame. So that the idea is you're not boiling out all of those great properties in your oil, but you are melting the wax into the oil so that when it cools down, it solidifies, you get a really nice texture. And I think this is all sort of, you might like a harder texture or you might like a smoother texture. So you can, just leave it at 1 tablespoon and see how that works for you. I live in a very hot climate, and then I also mail these out. So I put 2 tablespoons because I like that consistency, but I bet you I could even put 2.5 or even go to 3, depending on what sort of consistency you're looking for. And I like to stir it around with just like a little wooden stick. It's the same wooden stick that I use a few times if I'm making the same sort of blend. And once it's all infused, it'll be nice and translucent. It'll look like the rest of the oil. So that's already ready for the next tablespoon. As this is melting, I'm curious to know what sort of self-care practices people have for themselves. What do you do? Do you go for walks? Do you meditate? Do you do yoga? Do you treat yourself to nice baths? What are those healthy ways that you've been able to take care of yourselves through the pandemic? Because it's been a rough year, right? Year and a half with all the madness that's going on around us. Anything in particular that you've enjoyed? I know for me personally, I'm not sure where I got the idea from, but somebody had mentioned, oh, that's what it was. Somebody had gifted me a bushel of flowers, marigold flowers with basil that was growing outside of their establishment. And I think they're the ones that mentioned, like, yeah, you can use it in a bath or shower with it. And I was like, that's genius. I don't need to like draw a bath to take an herbal bath, right? Because sometimes I get lazy. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do all that. So what I did is I took that bundle that they had given me. It was a really generous bundle. I could have added lavender to it, whatever else I wanted to. I think I even added rosemary actually. And so what I did with that bundle is I just tied it to the shower head of my bathroom and or of the shower head, and it was just like magnificent. It was the most wonderful thing. It tasted, I mean, it smelled a little bit like a roasted turkey or chicken, but it was awesome. So walking, Pilates, a little weed, yeah, girl. I'm about that too, because sometimes you need a little bit of good medicine, right? So here we have the oil that's nice and hot. It's all infused. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pour this oil into some containers. So these particular containers I got at the dollar store. You can't beat it. $1 for 4 of these little tin cans. But sometimes you don't have those available to you. So one of the things I like using are the CBD sort of containers that I ask all my friends for. I'm like, hey, if you have any of those, give them to me. I'll use them. And they're perfect, right? You just have to make sure that you clean them and dry them. The other thing that I use, if I can't get these, because sometimes they sell out or they'll have a product and then they won't have it anymore. But I also have made it in like these little Nivea containers, right? So here you can see one of the salves that I've made in the past in this little Nivea container. So I'm all about use what you got, use your resources. You can also use like little small glass jars, anything that's not plastic, because as you can imagine, this is pretty hot. You don't want it to melt the plastic. So I'm just going to pour this in here. And sometimes the other thing you want to be aware of is this will still have water on it. So you either let it sit a little bit or you wipe the water down so the water doesn't get into your salves. And then you just carefully pour it into your containers. Don't over pour and don't under pour. Make sure you have a generous amount in there for yourself and your friends. And this will make about 4 of those small containers. So um, you want to make sure that when you pour also that you don't get any other little things kind of floating in there. Don't cover them yet. You want to wait about 24 hours to cover them with the lids. Otherwise, you're going to get condensation in there. And, you don't want that in your oil either. But that's it. 24 hours from now, I'll have a really nice salve like this one right here that you can use. You can share and give it to a friend. I use it on my lips. I use it on my cracked feet. I use it on my hands. I use it for everything. I know that when I was breastfeeding, I had a really awesome one that I would use as a nipple cream because your nipples crack when you like are breastfeeding a child for the first time. And yeah, I think it's just a really good way to nourish yourself, nourish your body, nourish your soul, and share that love and nourishment with your community, your friends, your family. As you can see, I have 4. I can't use all 4. It takes me about probably like, I don't know, at least a few months to get through one of them. And I also don't want them to go bad. So for me personally, I would rather like share that with other people than to hoard them all to myself. Friends and family also say like, why don't you sell them? You should sell them. But for me personally, it's I think like I don't want to make a business out of it because I want it to be something that is always an enjoyable process for me. Before I even started this workshop, I lit some sage, did a little prayer, And that's the way I work with it. I work with it as like a medicinal, traditional practice of me kind of relearning a lot of what I think we have lost in for many of us who have moved to this country and are away from our traditions. I think a lot of us are embracing that, right? And learning from our abuelas and our teachers and our parents and really understanding all of that knowledge that is there that has been passed on from generation to generation. So if you have your grandparents in your life still, if you have elders in your life still who have this information, I can't stress enough to, tap into those beautiful resources that are in our communities and in our families that have this knowledge still with them that they can pass on to us and share it, right? Once you have it, share it too with others and your community. So I would love to take any other questions or any comments that people have, anything else that might be on people's minds. So again, you guys, join me at the end of the month. I'm going to be teaching how to do the body spray, the body scrub, sugar body scrub, and also the Epsom salt bath mixture. They're great gifts, great treats for yourself, and just a lot of fun to be able to experiment with these sort of low budget self-care items that you can make for yourself that are not only good for you, like physically, but they're good for your soul too. And I think it's much better than buying the, stuff at the store that has a million different ingredients that you don't even know how to pronounce, right? So I encourage you, do what you can wherever you're at in your practice and find those things that you love and that you can share with others. So thank you again for joining me and Tia Chuchas. You can follow me on Instagram at Shara Nieto. I post a lot of the, plantitas that I see at work and also a lot of this sort of stuff that I'm working on at home. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please share this with others and join us
And
again for the next workshop.
Shara, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
The first one is, can you also use lavender as a substitute for creosote?
Yes, absolutely. I love working with lavender. It smells so good. Again, it's almost like aromatherapy, right? So if you have lavender accessible to you, use the lavender. And sometimes I've done even like little drops of rose that I have, like essential oil. I personally don't like working too much with the essential oils in this, but you could, if you are more familiar with essential oils, you can do that too. But make sure you infuse your oil first so that it smells like the plant versus the olive oil or whatever oil you're using. Anything else?
No, that's it. We have a lot of people just saying thank you and
Oh, thank you
that
guys.
hopefully they'll be joining us for the next one.
Yes, please do. The details should be up within the next few weeks here. So, gracias a todos, las Kamatli. Thank you, Dios Potik, en todos los idiomas.
And if anybody would like to sign up for our newsletter, you can do it by going onto our website at getchucha.org, or you'll also find a lot of information on our Instagram, our social media, also Tia Chucha, and we'll be posting up information on future workshops.
Bueno, gracias a todos.